There's the moment in Oblivion that stays with you, whether it's your first time or your 50th. You emerge from the sewer, where you spend your first hour as tutorial, the damp stone behind you fades into sunlight, and suddenly you're outside. The world opens up all at once. Water glistens under the pale blue sky, the trees sway just a little too much in the breeze, and the music, that quiet swelling melody by Jeremy Soule, wraps around the scene like a memory you haven't lived yet, but somehow recognize. And then, nothing really happens. No dramatic cutscene, no forced quest marker, just wind, a lake, and the world around you. Well, and then you get several notifications about DLC house mods you installed. Yeah, thanks Howard, I really appreciate the medieval WhatsApp messaging. But even that can't ruin the feeling. That incredible, untouchable freedom, where the world doesn't push you, it simply offers itself. You can walk in any direction, follow any path, or just stand there and soak it all in. There is no pressure, no expectations, just the possibilities before you. You've probably heard me talk about Skyrim a lot on this channel, and I do love it, but Oblivion was my first. It arrived just as I got the PC beefy enough to play something modern, and from that point on, it became my entire world. I played it every single day after school, not always to achieve something, but often just to exist in it. Compared to Morrowind, Oblivion felt alive. NPCs didn't just stand around waiting for you to talk to them, they moved through the world, they talked to each other, they ate meals, traveled from place to place, even if awkwardly. It really seemed like a world you could live in, like something you could step in and never have to leave. And for a kid with imagination running wild, all those clunky interactions and janky conversations didn't break immersion. They made it better. It was a part of its charm. And sure, looking back now, some of it is laughable. The voice actors are basically the same 5 people in different hats. The facial animations, like everyone were trying way too hard to show them on their face. But despite all that, or maybe even because of it, there weren't really any games that could do the same back then. And honestly, even today, not so many can. Because for all those funny bugs, the stiff animations and the cheese wheels stacked to the ceiling, Oblivion did something extraordinary. Bethesda didn't just make a fantasy game, they made a living, breathing world, one of the most ambitious games ever created. And today, my dear viewer, I want to take you back there. The game was released in 2006, right at that weird transitional moment between gaming generations, when things were just starting to feel bigger, more ambitious, and more real. It was the follow-up to Morrowind, and while the game was beloved, Oblivion was a whole different beast. Where Morrowind was strange and alien, full of giant mushrooms and weird floating bug armor, Oblivion brought things closer to traditional Western fantasy setting. But it did it on a scale that was mind-blowing at the time. The world of Cyrodiil was massive. The playable landmass was roughly 16 square miles, which made it slightly bigger than Morrowind's Wonderfell, and it was packed with lush forests, rolling hills, lakes, ruins, cities, villages, and of course portals to fiery hellscape of Oblivion itself. But it wasn't just about size, it was about density. How much of the world felt handcrafted, how many little surprises were tucked away in caves or behind locked doors. For a lot of people, this was their first truly open world RPG. It was, and is, the kind of game where you'd set out to deliver a letter to a castle, and 2 hours later realize that you're the head of Assassin's Guild, wanted for stealing a cabbage, and somehow still carrying this amulet of kings you're supposed to deliver to save the world. Despite that, it was also the first game where Bethesda and some other companies started using scripts and AI to make the game world for them. And that could be felt. While cities and some specific places on the map were handcrafted fully and were beautiful cause of it, the dungeons in Oblivion were mostly uninspired mess. Just a bunch of stones and doors with enemies in rooms. Nothing really to discover beyond loot and maybe a skeleton with a key. You didn't go into ruins in this game expecting a mystery. You went in expecting a big hallway with glowing walls, a few undead, and a lever puzzle that kind of worked. And yet, you still went. Because even if the layout was predictable, the world around it wasn't. The dungeons in this game weren't just a destination, they were just another thread in the larger tapestry of wandering through Cyrodiil. You didn't explore because you were promised some amazing quest or unique armor at the end, you explored because you could, and it felt good. And back then, that freedom still felt rare. It was the time before Ubisoft learned that open world games sell, and so the market wasn't flooded by them. Back then, it felt like a true freedom. Most games back then were still about moving from level to level, checking boxes, progressing through fixed stages, but Oblivion just handed you the reins and walked away. It gave you the world that trusted you to get lost in. You could pick flowers, become a vampire, climb mountains, or do some roleplaying as a wizard in Arcane University because you just liked how the ropes looked. And you know, I'm gonna be honest with you, I was one of those weird few people who laughed that you had to earn recommendations from all the local guilds just so you can get into this Arcane University. To my childhood brain, that made it feel incredibly special. Like it was some sacred place hidden behind layers of tradition and trust, reserved only for those who truly understood the arcane. People who didn't just cast spells, but who respected magic and who were part of something older and deeper. And because the university was the only place where you could craft your own spells or enchant items, at least before the Frostcrack Spire DLC, it held this almost mythical status in my mind. It wasn't just another building in a city, it was a goal, a destination, something you aspired to reach not just because of gameplay mechanics, but because it felt like a place to be if you really took magic seriously. And it wasn't just Arcane University. Joining the Fighters Guild, the Thieves Guild, the Dark Brotherhood, each one felt like stepping into a whole different subculture within Cyrodiil. Although partly they were. They had atmosphere, attitudes and flavor. You started as nobody, but the moment you stepped into the hideout or heard Lucie and Lachance whispering in your sleep, it felt like you've been invited into something secret. And yes, people can and do criticize the story, the lack of meaningful choices, the sometimes flat characters, the level scaling that turned every bandit into Daedric armored warlord. But it's all fair, but honestly, the sheer volume of retrospectives and other videos on the theme, that alone should tell you something. People are still talking about this game, even far before Remastered ever appeared. There are 8-hour videos on YouTube where someone goes over every questline, every cinematic in the game, and people watch those videos, and gladly. Because Oblivion is more than sum of its parts. It's one of those rare games that stuck. It carved out a place in our collective memory not just as good RPG, but as a formative experience. And now that I've told you a bit more about the original game, let's start thinking about why this happened. At the point when Oblivion was released, it was one of the most graphically impressive games of its time, especially on PC that could handle the load. It's a running joke now, but during development Bethesda had to install custom parts to PCs that were running it, so that a game that is not optimized yet could run and be tested on machines. And despite the fact that nowadays its graphical fidelity isn't something groundbreaking anymore, it still looks amazing in many ways due to its pure stylistic choices. And this is the gripe I'm having with Oblivion Remake, to be honest. Because as far as I see, the style that they have now is very generic, very Unreal Engine-like. It seems to be lacking this fantastical and whimsical style of fairy tale. That's the thing about Oblivion, it never tried to look gritty or hyper-realistic, it looked enchanted. The forests felt like they were pulled from a storybook. The golden hills around Skingrad or the misty woods near Bruma had this surreal glow to them. Like the whole world existed just slightly to the left of reality. It wasn't trying to be medieval Europe like KCD does. There was a softness to it, a strange warmth. The faces might have been uncanny and the animation stiff, but the world itself felt inviting. There's something about the colors, the slightly washed out lighting, the oversaturated greens, the weird blue haze on distant hills, that just sticks into your brain. And the gameplay in Oblivion, it was honestly also pretty varied for its time. Sure, the combat gets a lot of flack, and yeah, it's fair to say that hitting something in this game often felt more like flailing a ghost than swinging a deadly weapon. There wasn't really much in the way of impact or weight to the strikes, and enemies kind of just stood there taking hits like they were waiting in a line at DMV. But even with all that, there was something to it. You had directional attacks, power strikes. If you wanted, you could disarm your opponent or knock them back, or block with the timing. It was really trying to push toward more dynamic melee without quite having the tech or finesse to pull it off. And honestly, for 2006, it was quite good. And I mean, of course, Dark Messiah did it way better, but Dark Messiah wasn't such a big and sprawling RPG, so they had way more time to make this combat work. The magic system in the game was even more interesting. You could throw fireballs, heal yourself and summon skeletons, which was basics, but you could also turn invisible, paralyze people. It was a buffet of weird and useful abilities, and the fact that you could combine them with other playstyles made it feel very personal. You could be a sneaky illusionist who sets people on fire, or heavy armored battle mage who heals while swinging a warhammer, The game didn't really force a certain playstyle. And while it dialed back to some of the sheer madness you could pull off in Morrowind, Oblivion's magic system still left plenty of room for absurd builds that completely broke the game. As a kid, I remember being genuinely creeped out by some of the vampire-infested forts. There was just something about those dark, echoing corridors and the way they'd suddenly rush you out of the shadows. It freaked me out enough that I'd often avoid dungeons altogether. But then I discovered a little trick: invisibility. The game gives you a spell that makes you invisible until you perform an action, which is great for sneaking, but then you learn about Chameleon. It's like invisibility's cooler, sneakier cousin. Instead of breaking on action, it just gives you a percentage on how much you are unseen. And if you can stack that effect high enough, well, congrats, you're now a ghost with a knife. I remember the moment I put on my 4 for 5th piece of Chameleon gear and hit 100% of the effect. And I realized I could walk into a room full of enemies, swing wildly, and no one would even react. I felt like a god. But this is where Oblivion's famous auto-leveling system started to show its teeth. See, the idea behind it was fine on paper. Enemies level with you to keep the game challenging. Sounds good, right? But in practice, it often punished you for just playing the game naturally. Unless you were carefully tracking your attribute gains and skill usage, it was way too easy to level up and suddenly find yourself underpowered. Imagine leveling up a few times just by running, jumping, and accidentally getting better at athletics and acrobatics, and then you just step out of the city and you are jumped by a bandit in full glass armor. Meanwhile, you're still swinging your iron sword like you're trying to shoo a bee away. It turned what should have been a power fantasy into a survival horror game if you weren't too careful. And unless you knew how the system worked, you might have no idea why the game suddenly felt so much harder than it did just a few hours ago. And that is why sometimes you had to resort to those cheesy strategies like Chameleon 1 to survive. That said, some players figured out how the game system worked in return. You could delay leveling, grind specific stats, cheese training, or just not level at all by not sleeping even once in the game. Because Oblivion might have punished you for playing it wrong, but it also rewarded you for playing it right. So yeah, Oblivion's gameplay was far from perfect, but where it truly shined, where it outclasses almost every other Bethesda game to this day, was in its quests. Let's be honest, Oblivion has the best quests Bethesda has ever written. Not just in terms of writing or dialogue, but in how creative, weird and memorable they were. This game wasn't afraid to take wild swings with its quest design, and it paid off. Everyone remembers the Dark Brotherhood questline. It's legendary for a reason, but there's one mission in there that stands above the rest. The one where you're sent to a mansion in the middle of Skingrad, locked inside with a bunch of unsuspecting guests, and told to kill each of them, without being caught. It's a murder mystery flipped on its head. You're the killer, and the tension of sneaking through the house, setting up accidents, manipulating the others, it feels like something out of classic whodunit, but darker and with a twist. And the Dark Brotherhood itself truly felt like a family, with each of its members having some advice on each of the missions, with the burly orc saying that the best approach is to just openly bash everyone's heads, while others advocated for different type of stealth approaches. There's the Beneris Manor quest in Anvil, where you buy a suspiciously cheap haunted house and slowly uncover the twisted story of necromancy and obsession hiding beneath the floorboards. It starts off with spooky noises and things moving around, but it escalates into full-blown ghost encounters and secret chambers. It's not even a major quest line, it's just something you stumble into if you're nosy and have enough gold. And it's fantastic. And of course, how can we forget the quest where you steal the Elder Scroll? Yes, in a game called Elder Scrolls, you actually get to steal an Elder Scroll. And it's not just simple go there and take it, it's a full-blown multi-step heist complete with fake identities, infiltration, and sneaking through the most secure palace in the entire empire. And the fact that the game treats it seriously, that it builds the entire arc where you're not just some random thief, but a master of the craft, it's brilliant. The quests in this game weren't just distractions, they were thoughtfully structured, often layered, and always pushing into unexpected directions. Oblivion didn't settle for go here, kill this. Well, apart from couple quests, I guess. Instead, quests played with expectations, introduced twists, and at times even gave you room to approach things your own way. A big part of what made Oblivion questing so memorable is how often it surprised you. You would take on what looked like a simple contract, only for it to spiral into something completely different. The game constantly blurred the lines between main and side content. Take the Painted World quest in Coral, for example. On the surface, it starts off unassuming enough. A local artist has gone missing. His wife is worried. You go to check out his studio, expecting maybe a theft or a kidnapping, but what you get instead is something magical. You find a painting on the wall and you get sucked into it. Suddenly, you're not in Cyrodiil anymore. You're in this surreal hand-painted world filled with watercolor skies and strange trolls that look like living sketches. It's a short quest, but it's so wildly different in tone and presentation that it sticks with you. It doesn't follow any traditional RPG structure, it's just this weird imaginative detour that reminds you how much love and experimentation went into this world. That's the thing, Oblivion wasn't afraid to be strange. It wasn't afraid to play with tone or break immersion in the name of creativity. The Painted World quest wasn't mechanically deep, you just get to kill some painted trolls with a paint removal substance as a poison. But it was magical, it gave you a memory, and for a lot of players that's more valuable than a loot or skill point. Of course, there was a problem with all questing in Bethesda games that it's mostly linear with minimal, if any, choices given to the player, but for me their games were never about quests with hard choices and consequences, and I feel like Oblivion didn't need them to become great. But Oblivion wasn't only known for its quests. It also had the best and the worst DLC Bethesda has ever put out. And I say that with full affection. On one hand, you've got Shivering Isles, a full-blown expansion that doesn't just add content, it builds an entirely new world with its own rules, lore, tone and aesthetic. On the other, you've got Horse Armor. Just that, for $250. It's one of the most infamous microtransactions in gaming history, but let's forget about that and start with the good stuff. Shivering Isles wasn't just good, it's arguably the best expansion Bethesda has ever made. It doesn't feel like a side story or a small bolt-on adventure, it feels like a fully realized standalone world with its own tone, rules and identity. It's a world that could have been its own game entirely, and yet was offered as an expansion to Oblivion. The realm governed by Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness, allowed players to visit one of the most unique places in this universe. Before Shivering Isles, Sheogorath was just another obscure name among the Daedric pantheon, but after this expansion, he became a central iconic figure that is probably still the favorite Daedric prince of everyone till this day. Because he wasn't just crazy, he was clever, manipulative and very, very entertaining. Imagine if the expansion was just set in something like Moloch Ball's realm, where he would be just a big baddie to kill. But with Shivering Isles, Bethesda could go nuts with the quest designs, with designs of the locations, with everything. The isles themselves are divided into two distinct regions, Mania and Dementia. Each represents a different form of madness. Mania is colorful and lush, teeming with surreal landscapes and eccentric characters who mask their instability beneath smiles and extravagance. Dementia, by contrast, is dark, oppressive, paranoid, a reflection of fear, suspicion and internal decay. Together, the two sides form a mirror of Sheogorath himself, and the realm reacts to your decisions as you work your way deeper into this world. As I mentioned, the quests you find in the Isles are stranger and more creative, and often more unsettling than anything in the base game. You're constantly pulled between the absurd and the profound. One moment you're helping a man stop the sky from falling because he's convinced it will crush him, and the next you're making choices that determine the fate of the entire realm, guided by a god who might upload or destroy you at any moment. The environments are equally distinct. Gone are the forests and hills of Cyrodiil. Here you walk through glowing mushroom groves, jagged obsidian cliffs, twisted root caves, and shimmering alien terrain. Even the enemy design is so creative, as if you're fighting the physical manifestations of disturbed minds. Compared to Shivering Isles, Knights of the Nine is a much more modest offering. It's a traditional expansion in a classic sense. Focused, linear, and relatively safe. The premise is kinda classical. You uncover a long-forgotten holy order, retrieve ancient relics, and ultimately stand against an ancient evil threatening to return. It's a noble mythic story that ties into larger religious and historical themes of Elder Scrolls universe. There's nothing bad about it per se, it's a well-paced questline with some cool moments, and it does feature the coolest boss fight in the whole game, and it also probably has the most iconic armor set, but it's also very, very straightforward. Once you've played through it once, it doesn't leave much of a lasting impact. It lacks the surreal creativity and branching weirdness that makes other parts of Oblivion stand out. That said, there is one thing that completely changes this. Knights of the Nine Revelations. It's a fan-made mod, massive in scope and absolutely transformative. Revelations doesn't just expand the original DLC, it rewrites the entire experience into something worthy of the main game's content. It dives deep into lore of divines, the Aelids, the Pelinal Whitestrake, and the very foundations of Tamrielic religion. It gives a proper weight and history to crusade your undertaking. Being probably one of the best mods for Oblivion altogether, it takes this one decent, if unremarkable DLC, and through this mod it becomes one of the most lore-rich and thematically mature and emotionally resonant Elder Scrolls experiences I've ever had. It treats your character's journey as something truly legendary, and it feels like kind of expansion Bethesda would have made if they had more time, budget, and, well, ambition to push it further. If you've played Knights of the Nine and thought it was meh, I can't recommend Revelations enough. It turns that storyline into something unforgettable. But apart of big DLCs, we had horse armor, the cosmetic DLC that gave your horse a little shiny plate mail or elven armor, and, well, basically nothing else. It became a poster child for bad DLC practices, and to this day people still reference it whenever companies get greedy with microtransactions. To be fair, it's kind of incredible how much of cultural damage one DLC can make. But even beyond those two extremes, Oblivion DLC's offering were a strange mix. You had a Frostcrack Spire, which gave you a huge magical wizard tower, fully customizable and packed with portals and enchanting altars. There were other house DLCs like Thieves' Den, Vile Lair, Bottlehorn Castle, and each of them had a small quest attached. And then you had Merunus Razor, which added a dungeon and a legendary weapon. And, well, not much else. Just a straightforward dungeon with the blade at the end, which was kinda underwhelming as well. So yeah, Oblivion DLCs were just all over the place. Some of it was shallow fluff, some of it was surprisingly atmospheric, and some, like Shivering Isles, were absolutely unforgettable. It perfectly mirrors the rest of the game in that way. It was messy, uneven, but very full of soul. And speaking about the soul, it wouldn't be a video about Elder Scrolls game without talking about one singular person who gave a soul to each of those games. Jeremy Soule. How fitting. The score of those games doesn't just support the world, it defines it in many ways. The first time you step out of the sewers and that soft orchestral swell rises up in the background, it's not just music, it gives you the best feeling in the world. And despite being so remarkable, it's actually quite restrained. It's not full of bombastic cinematic crescendos, instead, it lingers in the background, serene, melancholic, and prone to contemplation. Of course, we have bangers like Reign of Septims, but overall, it's full of calmer music like Harvest Dawn, which apart from being a meme nowadays, still gives me shivers in how calming and serene it is. Whether you're wandering through a quiet forest or creeping through a forgotten ruin, the music is always there, lightly coloring the mood without pushing it. Battle themes are subtle but tense, never dominating the moment. Dungeon music is eerie and sparse, letting you soak in the silence between the echoes. And the main themes, they're some of the most peaceful in any RPG, perfectly capturing that strange nostalgic calm that defines so much of Oblivion's tone. This is the kind of soundtrack you find yourself listening to years later. At least I do, outside of game. Because it doesn't just remind you of this fantasy world, it reminds you of a feeling you had while you were there. Overall, Oblivion sits in a strange and beautiful place within Elder Scrolls timeline. Sandwiched between the alien, dense mystery of Morrowind and the streamlined high fantasy epic of Skyrim, it often feels like the middle child, less exotic than one, less polished than the other. But in that in-between space, it carved out something completely unique. It was a game of contradictions, bright and cheerful on the surface, but filled with creeping dread and ancient threats. Filled with systems that didn't always work perfectly, but that players loved anyway. It was often awkward, sometimes unintentionally hilarious, and frequently clunky. But somehow, it just made it better. Because more than anything, Oblivion felt genuine. It wasn't trying to impress you with spectacle, it didn't bombard you with cinematics or quicktime events, it simply dropped you into a world and trusted you to find your place in it. Even now, nearly 2 decades later, people are still playing it, still modding it, still making hour-long perspectives and deep dives into its lore and mechanics. And that's what I think Remaster failed to capture. Because Oblivion wasn't just a game remembered because of nostalgia, it gets remembered because it had something real to offer that most games nowadays do not. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. For me, Oblivion wasn't just a game I used to play, it's a place I lived in. A world I disappear into after school, where I could be anyone, go anywhere and do anything. It taught me the freedom in games doesn't come from having a million icons on the map, it comes from silence and from mystery. So thank you for taking this journey with me. So whether you're here out of nostalgia or curiosity, I hope I gave you a reason to replay the old Oblivion, not the Unreal Engine remake. It's a game worth remembering. Thanks for watching.